this is kind of our less formal session where we can see each other and the other students can see some of our alums. And Julie said she would be open to this. It's like the Saturday Night Live after party. We're can be with each other and maybe ask a few more questions. And so many people wanted to ask questions of Julie. We knew we would go for hours and hours and hours. They were all popping up in the chat box. So here's what we thought we would do is when you click on participants, there's a thing that says raise hand. And we thought maybe if you guys have a question for Julie or anybody, you could just click on the raise hand, and then Karen and I will kind of be your little moderators to go along with that. So,
don't be bashful.
Have a question?
Okay, I see Landon. Landon has a question. Landon Braemar.
Hi, hello. Hi, Julie. First, I loved the presentation. It was wonderful. Thank you for being our keynote speaker. It was fantastic.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed the opportunity for sure.
So my quick question is, in your speech, you were talking about your childhood and your personal stories, and that was it's a big deal to share about your personal life. So what advice do you have for people who are hesitant on sharing their personal stories and might not feel comfortable with it?
I mean, kind of maybe ask yourself why. And, look, there are situations where sharing everything about yourself is not necessarily easy or even advised, right? But the reality is that the more we cover, the more we don't talk about our real experiences, the harder it is for people to relate. And so I think sometimes I talked about, these misconceptions that people have. And if people look at someone like me in my position and say, well, she must have had a different life than I had, or things must have been easy for her, and I never tell my story, then people might not realize that in their current circumstances that they can achieve the same thing. And so I think if you aren't willing to be vulnerable, one, people think you're perfect, they think you're infallible, they think you've had things, maybe a different way than you've had, because almost all of us have faced adversity at some point in our life for some reason or another. And so I think that willingness to be vulnerable is to realize that you're giving back to other people, that you're helping them see that people are real and they have ups and downs in their lives, and then how you maybe helped, how you overcame some of those, or what obstacles you were able to clear out of the way to achieve what you have achieved or where you are today. And I think that's just, so if you orient it towards that, vulnerability allows other people to kind of learn through you. It helps to be able to be willing to do that. I can't tell you that I share absolutely every single solitary thing about my past. I don't. There are some things that I'm just like, yeah, those are for my really, really close friends and family. But, for the most part, it helps for us to be vulnerable and real with other people and help them learn.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much.
Cool. I noticed that we also have Prasid who has joined us. So while I'm waiting for somebody else to raise their hand, hi Prasid, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
I take it you're in Seattle?
I am, yeah, I'm in Seattle. We've been working from home for about 7.5 weeks now.
Wow, okay.
So it's really getting to us.
Yeah. Hang in there. All of us are, I'm waiting. I very much want to get back to New York, and so I empathize.
I was like, you sure you want to come back, Professor? I don't know. I think you can relax. I'm here and I'm okay.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. And yes, I'm here in Ohio.
Yeah,
Any
I
more
see
folks with
a
questions?
question from Taylor, and Taylor was trying to get a question in earlier. So Taylor, do you have a question for us?
I do. I have the same question that I had earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering, Julie, what and hopefully I joined about 5 minutes late on this, but I was really sort of wondering what kind of day-to-day practical policies have you kind of embraced within your role to help folks embrace change or to promote some of that social change that you were talking about in your keynote?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just creating open dialogue to talk, talking about it. I remember, 6 years ago when I first started doing this work, and I would sit down within our leadership team and I would say, hey, I want to talk to you about, some of our diversity work. Like this body language that kind of occurred was like really guarded and people were terribly uncomfortable. And part of it was just giving them a language. We did some training that really helped people like just have a common language, that Neuro Leadership Institute training I talked about. We did some, unconscious training, growth mindset training. And all those trainings basically just give people a language, right? So a lot of things that Professor Morman's taken you all through is a real gift because, it's something that people don't always get an opportunity to do. So once you get a language, it then really helps you start to be able to have an open conversation. So now when I talk to the leadership team about some of our deeper challenges that we might be having, they're open to it. They, they feel comfortable being able to have a conversation about, the different aspects and using the common language that we've all developed. So that's one thing, and there's the importance of training in common language. I also think, just social change is hard, and I think people come at it from different perspectives. I do a ton of blogging at our company, and on this topic, and the comments will show up, and not everyone always has the same point of view, and I love that because that opens up the possibility. And sometimes I observe, like, I'm not sure this person's completely comprehends the real nuance of this topic. And it just gives me an opportunity to pull off one-on-one and say, hey, can we sit down and have a conversation? I really want to understand your perspective and your point of view. And I hope you'll listen to mine as well and see if we can learn something together. So just really having open and candid conversations is the most important thing. And just when you do that as a leader, then it invites others in to do the same thing. So I just see that, people are way more vulnerable, willing to share their stories and willing to just talk about the challenges that they've had in their own personal lives. And I think another really important thing, Taylor, is to remember that society doesn't stop at the door of your office, right? All the things that plague us in our day-to-day lives in our society come into our office. And if we don't realize that, if we ignore that, if something terrible has happened affecting a particular community, and then you come to work on the next day or Monday or whatever, and you don't say anything about it, then you're almost like pretending as if like this didn't happen or it doesn't matter to a group of people. I mean, right now, I talked about the inequities of what is going on with COVID-19 and how it's really differentially impacting folks, especially African-American community. And for us to like not have that conversation, ignore that as if to say we really don't care, or we think somehow in our workplace we left that at the door, and that just isn't true. So I think that's some of the things that we do. There's tons of really like practical things about the way we address hiring and talent conversations and performance conversations and all the real practical things that kind of are interspersed into all of the people practices. But hopefully those are a few little things there that help.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are good organizational inputs there.
Good.
Thanks, Taylor, for
Thank you.
the other people. Taylor is from Cohort 1
Oh, awesome.
in Wisconsin, I assume.
One of your original guinea pigs.
That's
Yeah,
the truth.
I'm actually hunkered down in Cincinnati with my parents.
Oh.
My brother and his girlfriend are staying here, and they live in DC too. So it's
Oh, you're close. Oh.
I'm working remotely from Cincinnati, so I'm still working for Madison.
Okay, got it. I believe Evan has a question.
Hi, Hi, Julie. This is another question for you. So during your presentation, you were talking about unconscious bias and like mitigation. You mentioned the Neuro Leadership Institute. Something that fascinated me that you like kind of brushed over. I just wondered if you could like kind of talk about it a little more like in depth, was like the idea of unconscious bias training. Like I haven't heard of anything like that. And I was just curious if you could like explain a little bit more like what that's like and what that is.
Yeah, so there was a real fad even in the last, and a lot of companies still do this. There's been a tremendous fad towards teaching people the idea of how the brain works. And I think some of the, students in the Leadership Institute referred to some of this in the videos, but, understanding that the mind is biased and that our brains, in order to make quick decisions, especially in the time of threat, really have a lot of ways in which we've organized the world based on our experiences to tell us where are the threats, and so that we can make quick decisions. And those are important, right? And so what unconscious bias training does is basically tells you that, like, oh, as a human, you're biased and it's good and it's important and this is why you're biased, but oh, by the way, and it convinces you essentially that you are in fact biased. And I mean, I love the training. I was like, it was so cool the first time I ever went through it. And they did a thing where, like, you ever seen this thing where someone's saying something in front of you, like on the video, someone's saying something and they tell you to close your eyes and then you listen to what you hear. And then you open your eyes and you watch what you hear. And the person's mouth is moving differently than, because it's a video, right?
Yeah.
The person's mouth is saying something different via their mouth than what you're hearing them say. So in reality, there is a disconnect, but there's something like your brain, if you watch that person's mouth move, you absolutely cannot hear the other word, even though you know it's the other word when you closed your eyes. And so it's a real interesting way for you to just say, like, our minds truly are biased across the world around us. Okay, so they are. And so what happens a lot of times, if that's where companies stop or organizations stop and they just convince everybody they're biased, then it's really easy for people to walk out of the room and say, well, we're just all biased. And then it's almost can become almost an excuse for people's, bad behavior, so to speak. And so it's been found that if that's where you stop, you actually can have a negative impact versus a positive impact. And so what you have to do is you have to take it to the next level and you have to say, well, okay, so if I have unconscious biases, one, I could try to learn a little bit more about them from taking like the Harvard implicit bias tests to see if I can understand a little bit more about where my biases actually lie. But the thing about unconscious biases is they're unconscious. Like, they're just there in the background. So for you to say, like, I'm going to stop being biased in this category is like nearly impossible, because it's just things that happen in the background of our processing. So what therefore you need to do is say, okay, so there is a possibility that I'm going to always select people that are like me because I have a similarity bias. In fact, Neuroleadership Institute has studied hundreds of biases, and they boil them all down to 5 biases. And I actually had that in my talk, but I had to cut some out because I could tell I was running behind. So, but they boil it all down to like 5 biases. So I talked about similarity bias. They also have expedience bias, that we make decisions quickly and we are biased when we make quick decisions. If we slow down, we can make better decisions. Experience bias, that we have this idea that all of our experiences, even though they're perceptions of the world, are fact. Distance bias, that we prefer things that are closer to us than far away. And safety bias, that we always have a tendency to protect ourselves, to err on the side of protecting ourselves or to be safe versus seeking out gain. And so if you understand all those types of biases, and then you say, okay, well then what are some of the mitigating techniques? And so what the Neuroleadership Institute teaches you is mitigating techniques. So I talked about one around hiring. If I just am the hiring manager and it's my own decision to go out and interview candidates and then make a choice of who I'm going to hire without anyone else's input, the reality is my tendency for experience bias, for similarity bias, maybe even distance bias if the person is more remote, these are all going to enter into my decision making, whether I want them to or not. And so then I have this tendency of hiring someone like me. And so if you look around on teams, you will see it in spades that people hire people like them. Unless you try to say, well, I know that's a possibility, so how do I mitigate that? I mitigate that by inviting a diverse group of people in to help me with that hiring decision. And then really listening to their thoughts and having a conversation around how we perceived the candidate differently, and being willing to listen to the fact that maybe, you know, of the 4 candidates that you were talking to, that the one that was most like you is actually not the best or not the best culture add to your team. Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I see Rachel. I believe Rachel has a question.
Hey, Rachel.
Hi, so in the Leadership Institute, we've had a lot of conversations about our personality types and leadership styles, like the Myers-Briggs test. And I know you mentioned earlier that you're more introverted. So in diverse teams, what kind of challenges do you face when you're working with people who have different personalities, and how do you overcome them?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I mentioned Juliet Bork, who does some really good research out of Deloitte. And one of the things that she talks about is actually the most effective way to avoid mistakes on teams is to have people who actually process differently. And so that personality type difference is actually one of the best types of things that can come to the table in diversity. And so it's not necessarily diversity of thought, right? Because I mentioned that in the talk. I always worry about this diversity of thought thing because it's been historically the way that people talk about it. Oh, we just need diversity of thought. And then they say, well, I can fill my team with a bunch of white men and it's still diversity of thought because they came from different places. And the reality is that does not have the same impact as gender and ethnic diversity and other types of diversity. But what Juliet has found in this whole idea of what really are the most effective teams and how do they make the best decisions, it is around having different personality types. And there are different ways that people actually process and make decisions. So those different decisioning types are really important to the team. The reality is, and one of the things that I also have loved about some of the research that Juliet has done, is this idea that we always talk about like culture fit and, you know, I hope that it's comfortable on the team and we want everybody to like get along and feel like we're, you know, and the reality is that it's actually some level of discomfort on a team that actually creates the best performance. And so, like, if what we're trying to achieve on the team is everybody just gets along and feels great with each other and there's never any conflict, that is, you're actually avoiding the best comes from diversity. In fact, she's found that, like, with gender diversity, it's really interesting because if you have more women on your team, and I think there's a tipping point of around 40% women, there's a higher sense of social sensitivity on the team, and people are more willing to speak up. So you can maybe consider it sort of the caregiver effect or the mommy effect or something. But for some reason, when women are on a team, the whole team is more likely to share the conversation, to speak up about the things they're concerned about, to have more conversation about, you know, one of the examples I've heard is like, you know, maybe 2 people say something to each other and they think, oh, yeah, I get what you're saying. And then some woman in particular has this social sensitivity to say like, I don't think they actually meant the same thing, and might elevate the question. Hey, wait, I don't think that what Matt just said to Evan was, I don't think you guys were on the same page. And then then that dialogue, and oh, lo and behold, they were not on the same page, and you elevated the conversation. And when you have race and ethnic diversity, there is this dynamic that occurs that it just is like this, when you have a homogenous team, you tend to say, well, people are like me, whether we have the same personality types or not. Well, that person's like me, therefore, I don't really need to expand on my thoughts. You know what I mean, right? We all have that sense. Oh, it's so great to have people that just think like me because I don't even have to explain myself. They just like knew what I meant, right? And we all have that sense. But then something happens when people don't look like you on a team and you start to like not make those assumptions and you start to explain yourself more fully and you start to have more debate. And there's this elevation of everyone on the team. So I was talking about these social dynamics that occur on diverse teams. And so that's why, like, when you say, how do you get comfortable with that? You don't necessarily get completely comfortable with it. It is important that you realize that sometimes that discomfort is exactly what you need to get a better performing team, to get better ideas and more innovation and have more, you know, robust conversation. And if you then like start to embrace that, right, then that's when the comfort starts to come. Like you embrace the idea that you're going to have some level of discomfort and disagreement and conversation and debate. for the goodness of getting to better ideas and more creativity and better problem solving. Make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
I believe Casey has a question.
Yes.
Hi, Julie. So I just had a general question. So when I decided to go into STEM, my mom actually told me that I would have to prove myself more because I'm a woman in STEM to try to earn the trust of my colleagues. So I was just wondering if you had any experiences like that and how to overcome them.
It's not untrue. I couldn't tell you that it's, it's not untrue. And it's why, why I mentioned that, like, in technology in particular, 56% of women are dropping out because they just do feel that sense of like, why am I not viewed in the same way? Why am I having to over explain myself? Why am I being doubted? And so I can't tell you that it doesn't exist. It does exist. And I've seen it. And I hear it sometimes in the form of like, oh, she's just not as technical. And I think that one of the things that's super important is just to start to call it. Like, that's what this work that I'm doing is really all about, is trying to just call it, to say, well, really, what makes you think she's not as technical as her male counterpart? And usually what really comes out of it is she doesn't talk about technology in the same way that her male counterpart does, because she's trying to solve the business problem and talking about the business problem she's trying to solve, versus her male counterpart that is talking about the latest programming languages. Both those things are super important and they really need to come together in the environment, but like not valuing that difference in perspective is where that's rooted, right? It's challenging, and anytime you're a minority in a situation, which, there's people here that can talk about, you're going to find that there is this sort of extra tax that's carried. But, I sort of look at it like, okay, so what, you have to do what you have passion to do and what you want to do. And if you find that that's a field that you like, then, it is sort of this just extra tax that you carry. And I'm hoping that, as your generations start to go through these cycles, that we'll start to see some difference. Unfortunately, I'm going to tell you that right now, honestly, in the tech space, this younger generation, no offense to anybody, but this younger generation is actually more of a challenge than the older generation relative to this concept of, because I grew up in a time when women were not different in tech. So nobody doubted my capability because there were lots of women like me. And then as women became more and more of a minority in tech, this elevation of this idea that women might not be technical enough or cut out for the job or not have the head for the job, those things that people say. And so I don't know, I loved the conversation about grit. And we did a survey, in fact, of women in technology at Capital One. It was something I was really just curious about. Like, what is it that keeps women in? Like, what is it about women who stay in tech versus those who leave? And what is the difference? And one of the top things that came up was, one, they just love the work. And so they're just willing to work through whatever kind of various challenges are there just because they love the work. And secondarily, that the work had purpose for them. And so they really wanted intellectually challenging assignments that had purpose, and they found that in their tech jobs. But they also had grit. One of the top 3 reasons that they felt like they were able to stay in the tech field was grit. Well, grit tells me that you have to have some grit to overcome some of these challenges. Now, I can't tell you that I ever felt it. And I think maybe I was oblivious. I sort of talked about how I was never really all that into women's initiatives earlier in my life and career. And I think I was kind of oblivious. Like, when I look back on it, I'm like, oh yeah, there were probably times when people were discounting me because of my gender. But I guess I just sort of just went through it because I loved what I did. So I just kept, kind of pushing through. And then now, I'm like, just try to call it. And I suggest to women that they call it. If somebody says, like, you don't look like you don't look like a coder, or you don't look like an engineer, and you're like, well, what's an engineer supposed to look like? Like, just call it. Just, in good humor, just call it.
Thank you.
And sometimes it takes not good humor. You can start with good humor, and then sometimes you just have to be a little more assertive than just good humor.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question, Casey. It's an important one. What
So
inclusion is all about.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sharon, go ahead.
Julia Schaefer has a question.
Hi, Julia.
Hi.
My question, you mentioned before about how COVID-19 really changed your entire structure really and turned everything on its head. Can you think of any changes that will like maybe continue after the isolation period has passed, and maybe changes like to the company structure that might change because of it, of what you've learned?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. We just had a really senior leadership team meeting earlier this week, and that question was something that was posed. And it was interesting to hear our CEOs even response to thinking about that. I think we're all kind of trying to contemplate. First of all, I think it depends on how long this goes on, right? I think our muscle memory for things takes a while to develop. And so if like next week we were all back at the office and everything just went away and some miracle occurred, try not to be political, you know, we might just go back to the way things are because it was just too short of a period of time and we all reacted and we're just back to normal. And I think the reality is it looks like, and I know there's some people in here in the medical field who would, you know, probably say, this isn't short. This is going to be a long problem for us. And so I do think it will change the way people think about it. There's some really positive things, right? Like, I do think if, for example, if you're a company that was largely an in-person company, and then you had a few people who worked remote, those people always got left out of stuff, right? And now everybody knows what that feels like. Now everybody knows what it feels like to be the person that's on Zoom all day long, attending the meetings. And I think people will be way more conscientious and they'll make room for that. They'll stop saying like everybody has to work at home or in the office, you know, 5 days a week, that they'll make room for more flexibility, which I think is going to be a really positive outcome for people who need it. I mean, I worked at home. I worked part-time and worked at home some of my career because of raising my children, and it made it possible for me to like get through, you know, those challenging times. And yet there was always some stigma attached to it. And I think this will hopefully help people get through that stigma of people working remote or working in more flexible arrangements. And I think that could be a really positive thing. I mean, I think, for example, the work from home for our call center, like we had all this trepidation about sending people home to work in the call centers. We thought there'd be a drop in productivity or people wouldn't be able to find quiet time or whatever. It has not been an issue. It is really, really working extremely well. And so I think we'll probably look at that as a more permanent way in which we offer employment and think about the possibilities that opens up for people to be able to work in our call center if they don't have to actually come into the office and have more flexibility in the way that they structure their lives. So I hope there are lots more changes. I hope people stay more connected. I said earlier, I have no idea. You know, you think about it, you're like, why did we never do this? Why did we never get, you know, the whole family on the same Zoom call and have a conversation and feel like we were connected? But now we have, and I hope that, you know, we should continue that. And we should all like have learned how to stay connected in a new way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think we have a question from one of our seniors, Rachel.
Julie, I really enjoyed your talk today. Thanks for coming back again this year. I noticed in your talk that you mentioned that you really enjoyed reading books. A lot of us have a lot of time on our hands now that we're not in school. So I was wondering what those books, if you had any recommendations.
I do. I have a book list actually, because people ask me this a lot, but I have different flavors of books that I like. I have ones that are very academic that teach you just like really, you know, skills. Like I mentioned the Amy Edmondson's Fearless Organization. There's a book by Claude called Listening to Vivaldi. All of a sudden I was like, that's not right. That's about stereotype threat. There are, you know, there's a book called What Works that's about, you know, diversity programs and fleshing out what really works and what doesn't. Her last name is Bonet. I can't think of her first name, Irene Bonet. And so there are a lot of really good books like that. I also love to include things that are nonfiction or biographical that really just help with understanding cultures. And so I've read, I went to Africa 2 years ago. So I just really got into reading a bunch of books that were written by African writers, authors. I read Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, which like took me months because it's like thick, but was a really, really awesome book. Just really gives you perspective on the life in South Africa. And I saw someone earlier like was coming in from South Africa when everybody was putting in the chat where they were from. I was like, oh, cool. Loved South Africa. And you know, what I really came to appreciate from like reading his book is that it's not always about who's in the majority, it's who's in power, right? Because you look at South Africa and, you know, apartheid was about who was in power, not who was in the majority. So there are just things like that that you can learn from other situations. There's an author out of Nigeria that I love. She wrote a book called Americana. So I actually have a whole reading list because people ask me this a lot that I'm happy to pass on to the team and they could share that out.
Yeah, cool. That'd be awesome.
Okay.
Oh, Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. Awesome book.
Great book.
It's a good book, right?
Okay. Eli, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm kind of building off your answer that you gave to Rachel's question, but when have you found a good time to introduce conflict into a situation, and how often or how have you done so without potentially causing others to feel psychologically unsafe?
So when I said like, no, that was Casey's question when I said call it. I'm trying to thread this together. Can you elaborate just slightly, Eli, for me? Because I want to make sure I answer your actual question. I could answer something, but it might not be what you're really asking me.
So I'll give more context. So
yeah.
where I work with a bunch of individuals who have a very strong personality. So conflict is something that I come across all the time. So that's normal. But I've also had time working with other people who aren't as used to conflict or dealing with people that are like very confrontational, such as I tend to be. So my question stems from the thought that there are times, like you said before, that conflict is something that is necessary to help with creativity and other facets of working with other people. But when is it a good time to do so? And then from your experience, have you done so without causing people to close down or shut off from the conversation?
Got it. Totally. Yeah, it's a really important nuance. And it's one of the things that if you read The Fearless Organization, she really goes into a lot of depth of trying to explain the differences between good and bad conflict, so to speak. And the question is the conflict for the sake of conflict? Is it a sake for asserting power? Is it, you know, is it constructive? Is it in the context of trust and respect? And so I think that's the real question, right? If you're in an environment where it's very trusted, where it's very respectful, where the leadership is truly open to feedback, where they encourage it, where they embrace opportunities to learn from failure, those are the types of environments that create psychological safety. And they allow people then to speak up, to say, I don't think we're making the right choice. And for those that I know, some of these folks that work in the medical field, the book has a lot of examples about the medical field and conflicts between doctors and nurses, and you know, whether a nurse feels able to speak up to a doctor because of the sense of power, right? So conflict that is there for people's assertion of power is not a psychologically safe environment. Conflict for the purpose of people speaking up in a trusted and respected environment where they can say, hey, you know, I know that you think that it's super important that we achieve this goal by this date, but I'm really concerned that if we actually move forward with that really short timeline to get that thing finished, we're gonna miss some of the risks that are out there, and here's what I think could go wrong. That's not conflict for the sake of asserting power. That's conflict for saying, like, I'm actually seriously concerned that we are going to fail or, you know, miss some things if we move at this speed. And why is this date important? why is it so critical that the team move at this pace to meet this particular date? And then you have a discussion. And if the person who's setting the date says, I do a lot of projects, so that's why I'm giving this example because it's one that's close to me. If the person says, you know, the reason that it's important is this is what's going to happen for our customers or our business if we don't do this, this is also a risk if we don't meet it, and here are the risks that we take if we don't meet this date, and I'm saying here are the risks that we do meet the date, and then we have a discussion and we say, like, you know, okay, I get it, we really do have to try to work. Now, what can we do to mitigate the risks that I'm concerned about while we still move at this pace to try to meet this date, because that risk is higher than the risk I'm concerned about. And that's a really, you know, that's a conversation that's about, we respect each other's opinion, we're open to each other's opinion, we're having a sense of conflict, but it has nothing to do with power. It has to do with getting to the right answer for the sake of our customers or our shareholders or employees, right? So I think that's the difference that I would say between just raw conflict, which is not good, quite honestly. And I've worked in those environments where people curse at each other, they yell at each other. That is not the kind of conflict I'm talking about at all. That is conflict for the sake of power. And those are ugly environments. And I leave them quickly. So
I also
hopefully
have another quick question.
Yep.
What part of Africa did you visit?
South Africa, Cape Town in South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Tanzania, Serengeti in Tanzania.
Yeah, I went to Accra, Ghana this January.
Awesome. Yeah, I have to go back. I was there for 2.5 weeks, but it was not even close to enough time. I definitely want to go back.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eli.
Let's see, next we have a question from one of our sophomores, Abby.
Hi.
Hi, Abby.
I loved your comments on inclusivity and you know, having a sense of belonging. But I wanted to know that, like, during times like these where we can't all be together, how would you go about still being inclusive and creating that sense of belonging?
Yeah, I mean, it takes extra effort, right? It takes extra effort to reach out. You know, it depends on whether you're talking sort of personal life or work, but I think they're similar. You know, we have Slack at our office, and it's a way to feel like there's more informal communication. Because I'll tell you, I have worked at home various points in my career, I mentioned. And one of the things that I always find that's really interesting when you're working from home is that your interactions are formal, right? So you schedule a meeting because you need to talk about a project, or you schedule a meeting to work to you know, in your case, maybe meet up with your professors and have everything is formal. The sense of communication moves from that combination of formal and informal communication that you have when you're in person to all formal communication. And that is draining, and it's just difficult. It doesn't feel the same. It's the difference between, you know, an hour and a half ago when I'm giving you a talk and I'm talking on and I'm not hearing any of your reactions or seeing any of your faces, to now, where we're informal, we can say what we want to say, we're, you know, and the trying to get some balance between that formal and informal communication, even when it's remote like this, is super important. So whether that's using Slack, whether that's texting people, whether it's picking up the phone and making a phone call, wow, like, you know, something a lot of us haven't done in a long time. Like, oh, we're actually talking on the phone. Isn't that cool? Because we've started doing that, where we just say, if it's like a one-on-one conversation, like, hey, why don't you go for a walk? I'll go for a walk in my neighborhood and we'll just talk on the phone. It's a, you know, really nice way to feel like you're staying connected. So I think it's trying to balance that informal and formal communication channels that can keep us feeling more connected.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, just to echo that, at my company, we've been doing like daily, like small group calls, like both in the morning. Sometimes we do like group lunches where we can kind of like talk about what we've been working on, what issues we're running into, how our mental state is, staying at home all day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've had, you know, for those of you who are 21 and over, we've been having happy hours, you know, just like have a virtual happy hour and get your, drink and cheers and just have then a conversation about what's going on in your lives versus, and, honestly, that's why I said earlier, like, I'm finding that we're doing more of that than we ever did. Like, we know each other way better now than we ever did. When you have to invite, people into your home in order to have a connection with them, things start to change, right? And you start to realize people have kids and dogs and cats that are walking across their keyboard, and like, you just start to intermix it all, and you start to feel just way more real. And it feels better, actually, and there's some elements of it that are actually really nice.
So now we have a question from another one of our sophomores, Kyle Elberfeld. Kyle.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I had a question about, like, actually this is almost like an extension on Abby's question, but so with people working at home, and some companies are now looking at people working at home as more of a permanent solution. I'm concerned about people like keeping that work home life split. So like, people don't always feel like they're at work, and I was wondering what you thought about that.
I mean, like I said, I've worked at home some. I actually live in Cincinnati. I saw somebody call in from Westchester earlier. I'm in Westchester, Ohio. But I actually work on the East Coast. So I travel when I used to travel. I've been home for 7 weeks now. But then usually on Monday or Friday, and maybe 1 week a month, I would be working from home. So I've been kind of doing this for a while. And at first, I really mixed it up. Like, I would be like, let me go throw in a load of laundry, and then work. And let me go now put that laundry in the dryer and work. And it just was too mixed up for me. And I found that, like, I couldn't keep that balance. And so I actually work in the upstairs of our home. And so in the morning, I get up, I get my shower, I get dressed, I put on my makeup, I do everything the way that I would do it if I were going to the office, because I don't feel like we're on video, so some people aren't on video, maybe it matters less. But I feel like my persona needs to be the same as it would have been if I were in the office. So I do all that, and then I literally say to my husband, "Bye, honey, see you at the end of the day." And then I like walk upstairs and I work. And now I do have to go back down to get lunch. I usually see him during lunch, but he's retired, by the way, so he's not working. I have stopped like interspersing now. Look, I am in an enviable position to some, because I know there are people who cannot do that. They have children, they have other things going on in their home that makes it entirely impossible for them to do what I'm describing. But I have tried to then say, okay, it's 5:30, 6 o'clock, whatever time it is that I want to like stop my day. And I just, as my boss says, slam your laptop down and go. Because we have had to say, like, it's just too easy to go, well, I'll just get back up there and do one thing, or you just kind of have to say, okay, now that's the end of the day. What time would I have left the office, and what would my routines been, and try to get back at it. It's tough. I'm not going to tell you it's easy, but I did try too much interspersing early in my days of working from home, and I've now separated them way more, if that's possible. It's not possible for everyone, for sure.
Yeah, so you make it sound like you built your own physical barriers, in the sense of, like, when you leave work, you actually leave work, drive home, so on and so forth, to where now you had to kind of build those into your own house and lifestyle.
Yeah, that's right. And I heard people, like, I tried to read up on this or listen to people's, anecdotes about how to deal with it early on. And I've heard of situations where people like will literally, like, they do exactly what I do, but then they literally get in their car. And, in days when maybe some places are still open for drive-through, but maybe drive to the local Starbucks and get their coffee, and then they come back home. And then they, like, that's their mental separation for the day, is to, try to keep some of the same routines that separate. I strongly recommend, do not, like, still lay in bed, pick up your laptop, start working, and go, okay, it's 10 o'clock, I better get my shower. I mean, unless that's your normal routine as a student, I know things are super different. But for someone that works, I think that trying to keep the same routines and that same separation is helpful. But not everything works the same for everybody, so take it for what it's worth, so to speak, in my experience.
All right, thank you for your input.
You're welcome, Kyle.
Okay, so maybe we'll have our last question from Michael.
Can you hear me?
A little
Yes.
quiet.
Okay. How about now?
That's good.
I'm
Yep,
sorry, I have a tendency to be quiet in general.
no worries.
So first, I did want to just thank you for spending some time with us here afterwards. I really appreciate that. So my question's kind of broad, but I had it and then it was gone. One second. So I'm very lucky that I work for a company that's very focused on diversity and inclusion.
That's
And
awesome.
I am in a position where I can be an ally, and that's meaningful within the company context. But I'm not really, I don't come across as diverse per se, and I have a lot of difficulty feeling like I can be in those conversations, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess my broad question is, how do you be a good ally without, like you had mentioned, you have to be the person in power and be supportive in order to make things change. But how do you do that without falling back into the old habits of being the person in power and trying to force your way because you can,
It's super tricky. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It's really not. And I think intention is super important, right? Like, what is your intention? Are you trying to be curious about people's experiences? Are you trying to be empathetic? And then are you trying to say, what could I do? What can I do? Like, making an assumption that someone that's in a underrepresented or historically marginalized population like needs you to save them is like, that was one of the early things that happened with our allies program. Like, the men who had gotten involved in it were feeling like, oh, we're going to save you, and there was this sense of that we needed saved, and it was like, no, we don't really need you to save us. We can kind of stand on our own. But what we need you to appreciate is that women, in fact, like Casey's question earlier, right? Women, in fact, do face challenges in the workplace. They have been historically marginalized. They have not been paid fairly. They have, they have to have the babies. And when they have the babies, they end up getting, sort of this label and get dinged. And so there are different things that happen for women. And then, for me, so I can appreciate some of those. I've walked in those shoes, but doesn't mean my experience was exactly the same as other women. So I can be an ally to other women because their experience might be very different than mine. I was lucky to have, parents who were great role models for me, and a mom who was a type A personality and ran the household. And so I kind of had not everybody's had that. And so the appreciation for others' experiences, and then to try to understand how do you systemically break down some of those barriers is the way that you think about allyship. And the one important rule we said is you can't declare yourself an ally. You can't just like wear a badge like, I'm an ally. Really, someone else has to basically say you are, right? That your behaviors are such that you feel that sense of allyship. And in fact, I said about sending out some resources for you all. I'll do the reading list, but I also, it's interesting because we are having an allyship summit for our executive leaders in tech on Tuesday. And I was just looking at some of the pre-work, and there were a bunch of links to a bunch of really good resources. And I thought, oh, I'm going to send this to this group because it really does help understand that sometimes we do overstep our bounds. It has to be authentic. It has to be about really trying to call it. There's a really, really good article from a guy in the NBA who is a white player in the NBA. He's a minority, right? In the NBA, 75% of the people in the NBA are men of color. He's a white man. He's the minority, but he still has power and he still has different circumstances, right? And so he talks about how he has been able to just try to appreciate the systemic challenges and how his reaction to things that occurred. It's a really transparent article. I just read it last night. It's a really transparent article about how he saw situations happen. And remember when I said, where do you apply blame? That do you apply the blame to a person or the systems or circumstances? And we have a tendency to say, this happened, therefore this person, must have caused this to happen versus the situation and the societal norms that we live in. And so trying to understand that, now he can say, okay, I feel super guilty because I saw a couple situations through the eyes of a white privileged guy. And now I see differently that my peers are actually being subjected to racism. And I'm going to react very differently in the future. One, I'm just going to be a good friend to them, and I'm not going to apply attribution to them. I'm going to apply attribution to the problem in our society. And I'm going to speak up more about things that have to do with racism. And I'm going to say that this isn't right, the way my peers are being treated. So it is, but then there are some other articles in there that are about this person has way overstepped their bounds. They're stepping in every single time there's a conversation about something that's happened between Black women as a white woman, and they're like declaring themselves our ally, and they're really overstepping their bounds. They don't understand this conversation. They're, you know, especially in social media, right? They haven't stepped in our shoes. They haven't been part of this conversation. And why are they so fervently declaring themselves an ally in this social media forum? And so there are times when it does feel like people have overstepped their bounds, right? Because it isn't authentic, it isn't truly helpful, and it isn't about really truly understanding people's experiences. So I can't tell you that it's super easy, and it is a broad question, as you said when you asked it. But I do think these links that I'll send you will be helpful to help you appreciate some of the nuances of it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Well, thank you all.
You have just been fabulous. And what you're not getting to see are all these notes, these private notes that I am getting in the chat box and in emails from all kinds of folks. And they're just loving the conversation. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you guys for the opportunity. Yeah, I'm sorry, Louise. Go ahead.
No, it's wonderful to have you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I really, truly have appreciated the opportunity. It's, you know, these are hard conversations and things that we need to be talking about. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have shared this with you. And, you know, I hope that I've struck a chord on something that was helpful for all of you. You know, we have a long way to go in this whole mission. I said my goal would be to not ever have this job. I unfortunately have to believe that that might not happen in my lifetime, but I hope none of you ever have to have this job that I have, because some of you young people in particular, because I just would love to see us, you know, work our way out of the need for labels and D&I programs. That would be a good place for us to be in the world. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Enjoy your weekends and stay safe and stay healthy.
And thanks to all of our friends who have been on this call. We have wonderful friends of the Institute. Special thank you to them, and our marvelous alums of the Leadership Institute, you know, always in my heart, all of our students. And real big thank you to the students who made this all happen. Yeah, huge.
Definitely.
And it's not easy anyway, but without all the technology that they have here with us, the juniors, we never saw one another in person when we were separated and had to do this. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And all have a wonderful weekend. Please stay safe.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Stay in touch.